Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to talk to you today about the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. And that was in the Vietnam War. And today is Vietnam Veterans Day. So God bless all the Vietnam veterans out there. Many of you guys, when you came home, you were treated with a lot less respect than you deserved. And you deserve to be treated with a lot more respect and not been spit on. I was personally not a fan of the Vietnam War, but then at the same time, it was a very complex war, and the soldiers had no control over what the U.S. government was doing at the time, and a lot of the soldiers had served very honorably. What happened in My Lai was not typically what went on with the U.S. soldiers. Okay. Let's talk about the Battle of the Ia Drang. That's the first major engagement between the United States forces and the North Vietnamese forces. And the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley is depicted well in the movie We Were Soldiers, as well as the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young by Colonel Hal Moore, as well as, retired Lieutenant General Hal Moore and Joseph Galloway. All right. The first thing, the Battle of the Ia Drang, the United States won. They were heavily outnumbered by the North Vietnamese. There were between 1,600 and 1,900 North Vietnamese forces, and there were 395 U.S. soldiers. But the U.S. soldiers came in helicopters. Okay, they came in helicopters, and you saw that in the movie We Were Soldiers. Greg Kinnear did a good job playing one of the helicopter pilots. But what the documentary Vietnam in HD showed was that only six helicopters at the most could be in the field in the Ia Drang Valley at the time, and that only 6 to 8 U.S. soldiers could be in one helicopter. So all this was going on while the United States soldiers were under fire, when the Vietnamese were shooting at them, when the North Vietnamese were shooting at them. So the U.S. was heavier outnumbered a lot of times in the battle. They were outnumbered more than 395 to between 1,600 and 1,900. They were a lot of times outnumbered way worse because all the U.S. soldiers could not get to the Ia Drang Valley at one time. But the United States soldiers still prevailed. And the U.S. soldiers did have a little American flag, and they put the American flag on one of the limbs that got blown off by an artillery piece, but halfway blown off, but it was still standing in the ground. And the soldier had replied, just like on Iwo Jima, another victory for the Americans, but it wasn't a heavily publicized battle, and these soldiers didn't get the publicity that they got on Iwo Jima, unfortunately. Hal Moore led the soldiers in the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley, and Joseph Galloway was a reporter with UPI, United Press International. And Joseph Galloway had stated that the soldiers of World War II are known as the greatest generation, but the people in the wars after that, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, they were the greatest of their generation. They did their job, they did their duty, and a lot of times they did it well. And Joseph Galloway was determined to go to Vietnam and cover the Vietnam War, and he drove his bosses crazy. He caused a lot of disruptions and a lot of scenes to make sure, and begged his bosses to go to make sure, he did all that to make sure he was going to go and cover the Vietnam War. And him and Hal Moore became friends during and after the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. And the Ia Drang Valley was a decisive victory for the United States soldiers. One casualty, it was a sad situation. One of the U.S. casualties was Jimmy Nakayama, and he was from Rigby, Idaho. And the radio man that radioed the aircraft to bomb their certain targets, he was from the Air Force, and he had radioed a lot of things correctly, and this really wasn't his fault. But sometimes in war, miscommunications and accidents happen. And the pilot, more than likely the pilot misread the coordinates, and the bomb started getting closer and closer, but the enemy was getting closer and closer too. So sometimes this happens in war, and the bombs were napalm, a jellied gasoline. Okay, this isn't picking on anyone. The bombs were made in napalm, and the enemy was getting closer and closer. But one of the planes came in too close, and the radioman did call the pilot off, but it was too little, too late, and the bombs had been dropped, and the flames got a hold to Jimmy Nakayama, and when Joseph Galloway came and picked up Nakayama, he could see the bones from the ankles because the skin came off. And Joe Galloway still dreams about Jimmy Nakayama to this day. And Jimmy Nakayama was Japanese American from Rigby, Idaho, married a Caucasian lady, and he had a baby that was born. It wasn't that day, but it was a few days prior to the battle. And the other soldiers were tending to the other wounded, so Joe Galloway had to get Jimmy Nakayama to the helicopter, and Jimmy Nakayama was a true American warrior, and he's a hero. Just a sad situation. Anyways, also, like I said, go see the movie We Were Soldiers. That's an excellent movie. One thing, though, Jack Geegan was one of Hal Moore's trusted captains, and how he actually died in the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley is he died arm in arm with Private First Class Willie Godbolt. Jack Geegan was Caucasian, Willie Godbolt was African American, and they died side by side fighting against an enemy, fighting against a common enemy. So that was, everybody talks about the I Have a Dream speech and the civil rights movements, and that all did happen in the 60s, and that was very important. But this also happened in the 60s, and this was a major positive turning point for Caucasian African American relations. So the U.S. soldiers were heavily outnumbered, and the numbers can be a little bit misleading because not all 395 U.S. soldiers were on the Ia Drang Valley field at one time. So they were fighting off a much superior enemy force in terms of numbers, more than the numbers you see in textbooks actually dictate. So God bless Hal Moore. He led from the front. He refused to go back to base. The command wanted him to go back to base and let his second and third in charge to lead the battle, but Hal Moore said he's not leaving his men behind, and he objected to the order, and he risked a huge court-martial doing that, but he believed in staying with his men, and he treated his men like his own sons, and he was a very good father, and he made sure those men fought well, that they cared for each other, that they trained together well. So God bless Hal Moore. He passed away this year, and God bless Hal Moore, and rest in peace, and I firmly believe you are with God and the angels, and God bless all the soldiers that fought in the Ia Drang Valley, the U.S. soldiers as well as the North Vietnamese soldiers. Vietnam's our ally now. The times are different. A few years ago, Hal Moore did go visit Vietnam, and he met with Vo Nguyen Giap, and Vo Nguyen Giap was the highest ranking soldier in the North Vietnamese army, and Vo Nguyen Giap gave him a watch as a token of friendship and a token of newer positive U.S.-Vietnam relations. So anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Take care. God bless them. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.